from his experience in technology and in teaching by doing what he does. And you also have your own blog, which is a classic type of blog on philosophy, cross-cultural, right?
Yeah, cross-cultural philosophy.
And Matt is an assistant professor at Bridgewater State University, got his degree in philosophy at UT Austin. Works on Indian philosophy, especially, I think, cognition and skepticism, right?
Well, yeah, epistemology, theory of
epistemology in general. Yeah, and he's done lots of presentations and published lots of articles in collected volumes and other things on subjects in Indian philosophy, especially. And so we're very glad to have you here at Brandeis. I wish there were more people.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
Anyway.
Thank you for hosting this. I appreciate this chance to get out.
I will.
Yeah, actually, I might grab a glass of water.
All right, we have.
Yeah, bottle's great. It's harder to knock over. So, all right, so I want to just before I start on anything, say I always consider the questions to be the most interesting part of a talk, and I think Matt and I have talked, and we both do see this as a talk, not as a paper to be read. So it's hopefully as at least something of a dialogue, and you don't need to wait till the end to ask questions. If you have any question at any point, feel free to raise your hand. If I'm in the middle of something, I might say I'll get to that or something, but we expect to interrupt each other at some point too, as well. So feel free. So one of the things that I've found particularly important in the kind of larger dialogue around the digital humanities is, maybe something I found a little even frustrating, is that when people talk about digital humanities, a lot of the time they're talking about quantitative methods, computation and visualization, analyze hundreds of texts together, map out connections, which is very useful, but in some respects I think it's more like social science than like the humanities as traditionally conceived. And so the kind of problematic I'm setting up here is, do digital tools have anything to offer a field like philosophy? You certainly can do computation and visualization with respect to philosophy. I actually have a site that I've set up that way. It's sort of more as an experiment than anything else, but I'll just show you here. This is a site that I've set up with a software called Mediacron through Boston College, and it offers kind of maps and timelines, so you can sort of see connections, between different philosophers historically around the world. You can see how close Nietzsche and Heidegger were to each other, and look at kind of who were rough contemporaries, and so on. But I think that the thing about a project like that is that really, I mean, traditionally that would be more what's considered intellectual history rather than philosophy. I think Randall Collins did a book that I really like that was sort of analog work that was in that vein a few decades ago, but he called it the sociology of philosophies, and that's really what it is. It's not doing philosophy, it's doing sort of a study of philosophy from the outside. And so and that kind of history of philosophy does play a role in philosophical work, as I think classicists know. But philosophy really is above all based on careful interpretation and discussion of individual ideas and texts. And I think English language analytic philosophy often doesn't even go that far. It's just sort of analyzing contemporary arguments about philosophical topics like the nature of knowledge or of morality. But so the question is, do digital tools have something to offer philosophy in either of these senses, interpreting texts or analyzing arguments? And our answer is yes. And I suppose that introduction kind of is maybe something I didn't need to say to people who work for the Perseus Project, because that was sort of going to be my sort of one exception of place where yes, there is something obvious to offer there, and then you can offer the Greek versions with all the hypertext to the and so on. So that I think is one genuine contribution of the digital humanities to philosophy. But I think there's another key side beyond that, which is communication. which I think is particularly important for constructive philosophical work, where we're not only rereading past texts, but also sort of one way or another trying to take their ideas forward into the future. And there, I think there's no substitute for conversation. Right? That's such a key methodological element of philosophy, whether it's Socrates and Plato meeting in the Agora, or the Buddha and his Jain and Jivaka counterparts wandering and preaching to the same audience, or Schelling and Hegel discussing idealism in their dorm room. Right? Philosophical ideas are really stimulated by encounters with other philosophical ideas. That is one of Collins's points in the sociology of philosophies, is that so much of it comes out of social networks. And digital networks allow a meeting of the minds that might otherwise not have taken place. On that Mediacron site, you can see Mencius and Aristotle. Share that again. Excuse me. They always.
You want to call somebody in the middle of this?
Yeah,
They're rarely used, but they're dropped more than used.
Yeah, when anybody making a presentation on technology, inevitably the technology goes wrong one way or the other. It's just kind of an iron law. So, but you can see, I mean, Mencius and Aristotle were rough contemporaries. They were both around 325 BCE, but they couldn't have even imagined meeting each other, or even being aware that each other existed, because they were at the far ends of Eurasia. But now scholars can actually interact directly with each other across distances even greater than that. And so the question is, well, what kind of tools will best facilitate that? And until the last decade, I think probably the answer was still mostly journals, right? That's kind of been our traditional tool, and that sort of venerable tool been around since the colonial age, that print journals could circulate around the world, and since then we've taken them online as well. A lot of journals, for one thing, they don't have the immediacy of conversation, and there's something that's sort of lost. But beyond that, I think most are probably with the problems of academic publishing. The cost of journals is sort of spiraling ever upward, along with bundling and restricted permissions, so that most libraries, let alone individuals, can't afford to subscribe. And the budgets and their budgets will keep getting reduced for monographs and small publishers. That problem, I think, is particularly acute for the study of classical India, as opposed to classical Europe, because there are so many potential readers who are in India, and their budget tends to be much more challenging than even graduate students in Europe. They can't afford even prices we would consider modest. I met a reader of my blog in India, a young man around 21. And we were talking about Motilal Banarsidass, which is this company that produces kind of knockoff reprints of books in Indian philosophy. A book that would cost maybe $80 here. They'll do a cheap reprint of it in India for $10, for the equivalent of $10 if you buy it in India. Then he was saying, like, oh, but I can't buy Motilal books; they're so expensive. When you're on a typical middle class Indian salary, even a relatively cheap book is fairly expensive. Let alone the cost of these academic journals that charge ever higher subscriptions. So, for that reason, I think in study of classical India, the promise of open access is particularly important. We have scholarly work that's available to all. The key problem of open access is cost versus quality control. If you have any significant costs, they have to be paid somehow. So there are some open access resources that now even charge their authors, because that's the only way that they can think of to make money. And I think when at a time when the academic job market is so cutthroat, there are many who would argue that's even worse than the existing model in terms of its fairness. So, in a sense, we're trying to think about alternative experiments. Are there ways you can have both quality and low cost? Matt was pointing out, often we think of open access sort of repository that university might have of published papers. But all of that, I say to provide context for let's go, and especially our KA blog. So this is the blog, what it looks like, and I'll say more about it. We want to start in terms of this wider context. The key advantage of the blog is that costs are negligible. Right? If you leave aside the costs of computer and internet access for users, I mean, in a place like India, that might be those costs might be there, but at least at a non-broadband level, which is fine when all you're reading is text. People are likely to have computer and internet access even in a third world country, at least if they're educated enough to be reading English language scholarship in the first place. Even if you can't afford to buy $10 books, you probably still have some sort of internet connection that will let you read text.
There's cyber cafes everywhere now.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you can get it through an internet cafe. You might be able to get it through your institution, but either way, it's a cost that is more affordable than books. So that's the only cost for readers, and then the only other cost really involved is server space. And with the Indian Philosophy blog, I can tell you it's $6 a month. And I have a salary comparable to a professor's, so I can afford that without thinking about it. I was already paying that for my personal blog anyway. So there's literally no additional cash outlay for this blog. The cost in the Indian Philosophy blog is nothing, basically. It's an open access resource that's just out there and available. So the big potential problem, though, is you get what you pay for. Right? Money very often. Money matters because if you have money, you can hire editors, proofreaders, community managers. You can even pay contributors. Without money, you can do none of those things. And a lot of free internet content, probably I'll go out on a low. Most internet content has a quality problem. I think if you've ever a comment section on YouTube, I'm sorry. What's that? Good. You're
never safe.
Yeah. just there's that whole like Twitter. Yeah.
I do teach my students in critical thinking that YouTube comments are a good way to develop the capacity to follow the first rule of arguing with a fanatic, which is don't.
Yes. Yeah. It's you see just sort of random people when random people to contribute sort of whatever they feel like without any expertise or anything, then the result can be imagined. And this can apply even in scholarly situations. Notice the American Philosophical Association, the main organization for scholars, recently set up a group on LinkedIn, everyone, and is not moderated. And the results are kind of what one might expect of that. Yeah, I mean, half of it seems to be spam, and the other half is ungrammatical. The spam's pretty ungrammatical too, but it's not something that is used to scholars of philosophy. Wikipedia, has some quality controls methods, but there remain some problems. In particular, for this field, Wikipedia articles on India tend to have a fairly strong Hindu nationalist slant. Because those are the people who have time to write and edit Wikipedia entries about India. That's sort of how it's worked out.
And monitor them with strict, and monitor them to make sure that if there are additions, that somehow or other they'll respond to them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I look at some of these pages that say pretty inaccurate or at least extremely slanted things, and I think I would love to provide some balance on that, but I sure don't have time to do that. Especially when there are people who will revert everything and sort of try and get you into that sort of flame war over it. So those are all problems there. And with the Indian Philosophy blog, what we really wanted to do was create a community of scholars. Not necessarily professors, but people who knew what they were talking about, so that the information would be trustworthy. We do allow anybody to comment as long as they follow the rules that are set out, and we haven't had a whole lot of problem with that so far. But the rules are there in case we do. But to contribute a post, someone needs to be pre-approved in advance so that the information is trustworthy. We can't pay editors, so the quality control we have comes from pre-selecting and screening contributors. So anybody can comment if they follow the rules, but the posts need our prior approval. So everyone who is writing on the blog and posting either has or is in the process of getting a PhD in a related field. And so what that means is relatively little labor is required on our part to run it. We don't have to approve posts in advance. We trust the contributors to provide quality content because of their credentials. So the story of the Indian philosophy blog, the idea was shared between me and an Italian philosophy scholar named Elisa Freschi, whom I've never met. I don't think I even know what she looks like. We met through a very short-lived email list in Asian thought. It came out of, I think, the Society for Asian and Comparative Philosophy is a group that studies Asian philosophy. It's sort of less well known, I think, than the American Philosophical Association, the American Academy of Religion, partially, I think, because no job listings are run through it. So it's sort of an optional society in that sense.
But it's not unlike the SAGP, like the Society for Ancient Greek Philosophy.
Right. Yeah, or the American Oriental Society. Those kinds of groups that are scholarly associations that people are part of just for scholarship's sake, not because they're desperately scrambling for a foothold in the job market. But so that makes them smaller, but still of interest. And so there was one scholar at the SACP who set up this mailing list called Asian Thought L. That he was hoping to be kind of a resource for people to share ideas about South Asian or East Asian philosophy. And I posted on that a couple of times, but for whatever reason, the interest just wasn't sustained. It didn't have people with an investment in it to keep it up. But one thing that really did come out of it is that Elisa and I got to know each other that way. And I mentioned to her my personal blog. I'll show you now. I'd say personal to distinguish it from the Indian philosophy blog, but it is also a scholarly blog of a sort. This is called Love of All Wisdom, and the title, I think the reason behind the title should probably be fairly obvious, that it's a blog in cross-cultural philosophy across multiple traditions. So I try and think with Indian philosophy, Chinese philosophy, Greek, German, both sort of interpretively, but also kind of constructively to try and build a project of philosophy more generally. It's the kind of sort of wide-ranging work that I had long wanted to do and had hoped that would be the kind of work that I would do once I got tenure. Because while you're scrambling to get tenure, you can't go this wide. You have to focus on your narrow slice of everything. You can't try and be Hegel. You can't try and be Plato and have this sort of synoptic view of everything that's out there, because you have to specialize in order to fit the department's needs. So that's kind of my story, is that I was on the academic job market for 2 or 3 years and left it for all the reasons you can imagine. And when I did leave it, in some ways it was a blessing in disguise. It was sort of, a mixed blessing, but a big part of the benefit was that I could live where I wanted to be. But it also meant that even though I had less time to write as a scholar, I could write what I wanted to write. And so this blog really came out of that. That I can talk about texts that are written in languages I don't read because I have access to a translation. And that's something that plenty of people have done in the history of philosophy. Aquinas didn't know much Greek, but was one of the great Aristotle scholars. But you can't really do that professionally now. And I sort of recognize this doesn't get recognized in sort of scholarly venues, but it was really something that I just felt called to do, and I've sustained this for 5 years now. And Elise, and so getting back to Elise Fresky, she's been a regular commenter on this blog, and expressed a lot of interest in it, and sort of said, well, I wish you'd write more about Indian philosophy, because there's just so little about Indian philosophy on the internet, and thought, maybe we could start a group blog in Indian philosophy. And I thought, well, that's a great idea, get people together. Especially there was an inspiration for that in another blog that started, I think, right around the same time as Love of All Wisdom, maybe a little bit before, so kind of mid-O's. Called Warp, Weft, and Way. And just pull that up here.
It's an enormously influential blog.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a group blog in Chinese philosophy by Professor Manuel Im, who has been a professor at Fairfield University in Connecticut since about the time that and it was about the same time that I was on the market, and many of the bigger names in Chinese philosophy contribute to it. I've got the long list of biographies here, and it's become quite influential. There's regular posts, and we thought, this seems like a model people are willing to follow and participate in Chinese philosophy, and what if we did something like that in Indian philosophy? So it took us a while to get off our butts and actually do it, but we did. And then I think the biggest thing was to invite contributors to the blog. We basically began with a list of people that we knew and thought about wanting to invite, but sort of people who we thought were basically junior scholars in the field. We kind of wanted to have it be sort of start with junior scholars as people who kind of participate as equals, and then possibly invite the senior scholars later on once the junior scholars already have the discussion. And partially so they could contribute as equals, partially also because junior scholars tend to be more interested in online venues when they're not already sort of set in their ways. So we each kind of drew up a list of people that we knew. And there was only one person who was on both Elise's list and mine, and that was Matt. And so we decided we'd invite him as a third co-founder, and we kind of shared our ideas together. So we got the community together, and then we were happy to find that once we had gotten this community started, others asked to join. There were other junior scholars and even senior scholars who asked to become participants. It really attracted several scholars who were not previously involved in any sort of open access initiatives. I was particularly pleased. I just read a really wonderful book called Unifying Hinduism by Andrew Nicholson. It's a professor at Stony Brook, a junior professor. I was like, wow, this is a really incredible book. The way it sort of goes really deep into texts that nobody's read, and uses them to make a wider point about the history of Indian philosophy, and the way that there's more continuity between the pre-colonial past and the colonial and post-colonial periods than people have previously thought. Sort of the upshot of it. It was found a really impressive work, and then found an email popping up from him in my inbox saying, I want to join this blog. So it was like, that was a big sign for me that we something really we really had something here. And I think really I would have to say that the blog has been a success. It's really become a major resource for discussions of philosophy in classical India. And I also want to talk about why I think it's been a success. We have regular contributions. See some of our posts get a lot of replies. Just we get 12 comments here, and you can see on the let's just go back to the February here. If you look at the number of days a month we've had posts. We've got probably an average of 3 or 4 a week. So people regularly posting. So I think it's been a success, and I want to say a bit more about why it's been a success. so that others who are thinking about digital initiatives can learn from that. So I'm going to say a few words about that, and then Matthew will say some more from his perspective. So, questions: How do you make something like this effective and successful? First, I think WordPress is just a great platform for this sort of thing. I started out with Love of All Wisdom on WordPress when I was setting that up. It was 2009. I was sort of thinking, well, I want to start a blog. I don't know anything about starting a blog. Let's just go and sort of read how you do this. People mentioned, oh, there are a couple of platforms. You can use Blogger and Blogspot, but WordPress has this sort of range where you can go from this hosted service at WordPress.com to your own site on your own server. And so you've got this flexibility because it's such open source software. So I thought, well, okay, so I'll go with WordPress. And I started out writing this on WordPress.com. Almost immediately decided to move it to my own server because at the time, WordPress.com was less flexible. You couldn't hook your own domain name up to it. You had much less flexibility and customizability with themes and templates and so on. I think WordPress.com has opened up more of that now. It's become a more viable option. But I decided I would get my own server, and I started out with Bluehost, or no, it was called Just Host, which was a site that it's one of those. I don't think they promised it. They promised unlimited server space, and I think it was like $3 a month or something like that. And that was unfortunately you get what you pay for situation, because after maybe a year or so of working on them, they immediately shut my site down and said your traffic is too high. It's time to move to a dedicated server that will cost you $120 a month. And so basically, like those options tend to be a little fly by night. And I asked a friend of mine, where do you go for to tech-savvy friend who'd done some digital humanities work. He said, well, I had a blog. I've always hosted it on a company called Verve Hosting out of Britain. They're reliable. It's $6 a month, and they don't promise anything like unlimited server space. And anybody that promises something like that is probably a scam artist. So I moved to them, and that's been where it was hosted ever since. And I think nowadays, Amazon Web Services is a pretty popular option, and I think would do fine. But I think sort of generally the principle is don't go with something that looks too good to be true, and you'll be set. So I hosted Love of All Wisdom on that site, and then since I already had a WordPress installation, it was just a matter of kind of making it into a multi-site installation. And so now so Indian Philosophy Blog is hosted in the same place. So again, no extra costs at all. And I think having that personal blog has probably helped the experience of Indian Philosophy Blogs. There are some things that I knew about what were necessary. One of the big important things I think for a successful community is you do need to have some rules. We started the Indian Philosophy Blog with rules, which I originally didn't start Love of All Wisdom with. I originally just sort of trusted my contributors, trusted commenters to kind of play nice. But then there was an experience with one commenter who is a real scholar, is somebody that I met at the Society for Asian Comparative Philosophy conference, has a PhD in philosophy, is a professor at a community college, but nevertheless was something of a troll. Many of his posts tended to take an angry tone, and they would often actually reach into the level of insults and personal attacks. There was of course there's always that joke about why are academic politics so vicious, because the stakes are so small, and that certainly seemed to be the case. There was one post where he got into a debate with another commenter about Wittgenstein's prose style. And over that, they started throwing these insults back and forth, calling each other their mean names. And I said, no, like you got to lay off this.
In a more general case, if I may, so I think, you're bringing up good examples, but to go to any of the major disciplinary blogs in philosophy tends to be a depressing experience, right? It tends to be kind of like gossipy. It tends to be people basically complaining about what they don't like. But there's a place for that. But most people I know that I whose sensibility, I guess you could say, in my field, whose sensibility I can sympathize with and relate to, make a point of saying I tend not to go to the blogs unless I just want to follow through on whether the latest scandal I heard about was actually accurate. You know what I mean? So we had a point of just saying from the beginning we want to have a very different tone, and I think the rules are kind of a function of that, and it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I agree, and I think one of the surprising things, again with it, just a little bit more about that experience, this particular with this particular person that I had difficulty with. There was a point where there started sprouting up a number of other people who were commenting and kind of agreeing with him and taking that nasty tone as well. And I saw, I sort of said, like, please, as I started saying, okay, please lay off of this, or I will need to restrict your participation on the site. I went in to look for their IP addresses so that I could ban them, and sure enough, they all had the same IP address. It was the same guy who was just posting under multiple aliases to give the impression of ganging up.
Which is not uncommon too, actually.
Yeah. So that was really a lesson learned. So we decided we need some rules here. And I had a set of rules on my blog that are sort of fairly wordy. And I think we did a nice thing on the Indian philosophy blog. There's we drew the inspiration for our rules from another blog called Language Blog. And where they're their comments rules. So they have this nice way of having sort of long posts, but summing them up in sort of 2 words: be brief, be relevant, be informed, be polite. And so we didn't pick those rules exactly, but we modeled our rules on them. So so ours came down to be polite, be relevant, be scholarly. Right. Be polite, sort of the obvious ones. If you must attack the argument, not the person. Be relevant, meaning we don't want to get into extended discussions that are off the topic of South Asian philosophy. And then be scholarly, as in don't have some connection to the scholarly apparatus and support your claims.
Interestingly, this third one, I think there's more of a danger in the history of Indian philosophy than, let's say, classical or ancient Greek philosophy, because you do have people who are like living adherents to religious traditions, which somehow or other trace themselves to some of the thinkers we're talking about. And there's pressure to somehow this kind of like groupieism may come in ways that may not be as prominent in other ways.
So what do you mean by be scholarly? I mean
citations. Give appropriate citations for your arguments.
So that's what it says there. I just got moving.
Yeah, largely. I mean, the point we try to make there is that I'm sorry. Do you want to?
No, go ahead.
So, blog writing, and this is part of kind of the meta issue that we're thinking about, and kind of is coming up in this discussion is there a way that blog writing functions as an academic resource? And we say yes, but naturally it might be a little bit more prima facie and provisional and kind of tentative than something that's going to be printed in a paper or printed in a journal. And so we want to strike the right tone. Yes, you can put out prima facie ideas, but you still have to motivate it by appeal to contemporary literature and classical literature, so that sort of thing.
Right, and we don't insist on like a formal scholarly apparatus. You don't have to give name, publication year, etc. Just sort of mention if you're
it's about research standards.
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
And incidentally, even if we're not strict about it, there are a number of contributors who make a point that anything they cite, they do put a little apparatus at the end.
Right, and that's optional. I mean, if they want to do that, that's great. But it's more a point of like, well, if you claim that such and such is Nagarjuna's view, then like give us some text of Nagarjuna's where he actually says that, and just cite chapter and verse or whatever. And
in a way, like at a panel presentation or whatever, in the crucible of conversation, you're going to be called to the mat if you have claim.
Right.
So the comments tend to say, okay, follow up. I don't think he says that. Or, I mean, again, in a tone that we think is appropriate, but that some of the pressure comes from the comments. It doesn't have to come on high from us as the moderator.
Right. And I think, and one of the things that I think Matthew will be talking about, and I think it's been sort of helpful, is that in a way, I feel like that there's the content on the blog is comparable in a way to a conference presentation, right? That when you're making a conference presentation, you're not going to stop your presentation to footnote it and say, Smith, John, 2012, name of article. That's sort of but the idea is that that's assumed, right? That when you're making a conference presentation, you won't necessarily like put in the whole official apparatus. But the idea is that if someone calls you on it and says like, well, does it really say that? Then you'll be able to say, well, this is where I got that from. And so that's really kind of the key about why and what we mean by be scholarly and how that works here. And we also have, the other thing that I think was quite important with the rules that I hadn't originally thought about, it was not an issue on my individual blog, it was here, is how do we enforce them in the sense of who decides when these rules have been broken? And let me just get on to, hold on a second. We decided to leave that up to the discretion of the person who made the post. So there's actually, we do have one person who kind of regularly makes comments and is in something of this groupie mode that you're talking about. He's a big follower of.
I want to be careful just in case we link to this from the blog.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But he is.
He has that kind of what's called guru bhakti in Sanskrit.
Right.
Deep devotion to the guru.
Yeah, he's a follower of Sri Aurobindo, the 20th century Indian philosopher, and very kind of very enthusiastic in many senses of that word, enthusiasm. There have been some disagreements about how to deal with his posts. I welcome his posts I welcome his comments on my posts. I think that's it's not a perspective that I necessarily get a lot out of. Sometimes his comments have been valuable to me, sometimes not. But there's another poster who basically said like, I don't have the patience for that kind of thing. This is not scholarly. And so that poster was able to had the leeway to say, don't make comments like that here. So that's a particular way that we're enforcing it. Is it's up to the person who makes the post to decide whether comments on it are okay. Sorry.
We have a question from a remote.
Oh yeah, cool.
How many hours a week or day do you spend monitoring the blog?
Not many. I mean, when it comes to comments, WordPress has the feature that typically the first time somebody posts from a given IP address or alias, you have to say approve their comment, and then once they're approved, they can keep going unless you specifically say not to. So I get notifications in my email inbox about that, typically by the time I get to the site to approve somebody's new comment, it's already been approved.
Probably. There's three of us working together, and without any tension or having to sit down with a spreadsheet and fill out the hours. It's been very long. So.
Yeah, I think that if we did have to deal with somebody who was kind of on that borderline.
Can I get some fries with that shake?
What?
Can I get some fries with that shake?
Wait, hi. There's somebody named Ryan who is in this hangout.
Yes. I was like, what the fuck?
He's just trolling or something.
Yeah. Okay. How do I'm.
By the way, I'm sorry about that.
Hide from broadcast and mute.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm really sorry, bro.
Okay. All right.
Have a nice night.
Oh, eject.
Yeah. Okay.
That was.
I think if I understand what was happening, though, it's possible that person was actually doing something else at the same time. I don't know if they were actually trolling.
He also might have. I don't think he was trolling. I think he accidentally clicked on because it's live on YouTube right now.
Right.
So maybe he ended up on the YouTube video and then.
That's famous. He's earned his 15 minutes. So, do you want to? Sorry.
I just waiting to hear how many people are watching.
Just one.
Okay. Right. Okay, but we'll have the link up afterwards, so we'll probably get more people looking afterwards. Yeah. Yeah. So the question again was
how many hours you would spend.
Right. How many? Right. And so yeah. So the answer is not much. I mean, typically there's probably more time spent kind of adding new accounts and
Generating new content.
yeah, and and if we're kind of changing the structure of the blog, if we're adding sort of book reviews or something, if there's sort of some new way we're doing it, that tends to take up more time than the kind of the day-to-day business of moderation is really not a lot of the time, and that's important because I mean, one of the big things about it was we didn't have a lot of money to spend on this, so we had zero, but we also didn't have a lot of time. I would have been spending a couple $100s of my money on this a year would be a lot easier than spending 10 hours a week on it. So that's an issue as well, but it hasn't been that much of an issue. I mean, I wind up doing some sort of tech support for it, but I mean, that's one of the nice things about being an educational technologist is I do WordPress support at work as well, so I have some background for that. But I mean, WordPress it's a fairly stable system. It doesn't require a whole lot of TLC that way. And so that was our kind of a process that we settled on to have rules, and we used a similar process to think of our structure of categories for posts. That was something that I recognized from my own blog. When you have a blog that goes on for a while, categories and/or tags are really essential because if people want to find posts on a topic, they don't want to have to scroll through everything that's been there. So we basically agreed, on a bunch of topics. There are a couple of things like methodology, philology, and things like announcements. But really, our category, there were kind of two kinds of categories. We wanted to make sure to have categories for the schools of Indian philosophy, and that may be something that's kind of particular to Indian philosophy in a way, is that there are more, I mean, in Western philosophy, people will talk about things like German idealism or the Peripatetics or something, but it's less sort of it's more standard for people to kind of divide things up by thinker than by school. Whereas in Indian philosophy, the sort of traditional way to go about it is there are these systems of philosophy. Often it's sort of said there are 6 systems of orthodox Hindu philosophy is the sort of way of, and I think there's something problematic with probably every word in that sentence. But that's sort of the way that it's been kind of thought of. So it was sort of natural to sort of expand it and say, we're not going to necessarily divide. We're not going to use the word Hindu or Orthodox, and we're not going to say that there are 6 of them. There are a number of different schools, and we'll describe them accordingly. But go with that basic approach of dividing it up by schools, and then also divide by more kind of familiar philosophical topics. So typically, substantive post that anybody would make would have at least 2 categories on it. They would say, well, this is a post on Mimamsa ethics, so it'll be categorized under Mimamsa and under ethics. And usually there's more than one of each kind, but that way there are ways for people to go in and find it. So if you're interested in Indian logic, for example, you can click on the logic button and you'll see specifically the posts that have to do with logic. So those are part of our process for creating the blog. One of the lessons we learned in this process was if you want the community's approval for a policy or a change, go negative option. As in, we wanted it to be democratic. We wanted people to have we wanted all the members of the blog to have a say. But we realized in order to do that, it's very important to sort of propose something, sort of throw the proposal out there. Often, like the 3 of us, Matthew and Elisa and I, will kind of meet and say this is a thing we want to do, and then basically sort of put the proposal out there and say we're going to do this unless anybody objects. It's a much more efficient way than trying to sort of actively solicit feedback and say, well, what do people think about this? Because you often don't get many replies, and that can sort of drag on, and you never really know when you're kind of done with getting feedback. So put it out there, and if you get an objection, then you can have a conversation about it, and it'll probably be an interesting and lively conversation. But typically, people, if you say, well, we want to change it in this way, people are like, oh yeah, fine. So those are all part of making it effective. And the other thing we've already sort of touched on a little bit is to be distinct from what's already out there, right? This was a big thing that helped us, is that it was a distinctive subject matter. Most philosophy blogs are Western oriented. There aren't really many on India out there. I remember my dissertation advisor had mentioned to me several years ago, as I was floating this idea, that he was thinking about starting an Indian philosophy blog as well with others, and sort of seemed like it was kind of aimed for senior scholars. And I think if that had happened, there wouldn't really have been so much of a niche for us to fill. But they never actually did that. So we had this space to fill. And the other thing that Matthew hinted at is that the best known philosophy blogs tend to be about the profession, more about content. They're sort of sometimes gossipy. The Lighter Report is the best known. New Apps, some of the sort of philosophy groups out there, they tend to be about who got hired where, and this professor who had the scandal of trying to sleep with a student, and the sort of business of being an academic philosopher. And we wanted to be really focused on substance and content. And I think that's made us distinct. There are occasional professional announcements, but that's really not what the blog is about or for. So the key question in all of this, and in some ways kind of what I've been leading up to, is, so we screened the people that we wanted to contribute. We sort of got this list of the people that we thought would be good, and we get our quality by having them contribute. But so the next question is, how do we get them to do it, right? Because blogging is free labor. That is important. Yeah. So apologies to everybody. I had meant to press stop sharing on the blog screen and accidentally pressed stop broadcast. We needed to take a bit of time to start up again, but we're back in. So what I was saying is that blogging is free labor, and we all know academics have tons of time on their hands that they are willing to devote to any projects that are out there and have no commitments on their time whatsoever. That was sarcasm. The thing is that there's an additional barrier to getting people to contribute to a blog. Like peer-reviewed journals, we don't pay our contributors, but the contributors to peer-reviewed journals, their jobs typically pay them to write in peer-reviewed journals. Right? Writing in peer-reviewed journals is considered a part of their job effectively because their tenure and promotion depends on it. We can't do that. Nobody would now count contributions on a blog towards tenure, and since we're not peer-reviewed, they probably won't. So the question is, what motivation does anyone have to write on it? My motivation is a bit unusual. As a former professor who's now working as an educational technologist, it's kind of a natural fit in that it both kind of gives me tech experience for my day job and allows me to exercise my scholarly interests. So it keeps me involved with my discipline as my job doesn't, and gives me experience with digital tools. So I've got a lot of reasons to be involved with this, but I'm not typical. Most of our contributors, most of our members are junior faculty members struggling for tenure. So the question is, how do you get people like that to post? How do you get them to devote their precious time to something that's not necessarily going to contribute to their tenure and promotion? And so an example of that is Matthew, really, who I think has gone above and beyond the call of duty to support the blog. So a junior faculty member himself, has worked with us on developing it, posted a lot, had new ideas about expanding it, adding book reviews, and has not really gotten any compensation for it, either in terms of money.
I think it's debatable, but I'll bring that up.
Okay, yeah, no, that's great. So that, but basically, Matthew is exactly the kind of person you want contributing to a scholarly blog. So why does he do it? And that's a big reason why I wanted him to join me for this talk, is to give that perspective of someone who isn't necessarily a tech guy, and someone or even a digital humanities guy in terms of his kind of professional self-identification. Someone who's a more traditional or conventional style of scholar in general, but has found this a valuable resource and become a very active and very helpful and wonderfully productive member of the community. So
should I say
talk about why.
So, thanks. So just to make sure, it's 12 to 1:15, is that correct? Yes. I'm going to be kind of brief now.
Oh, sorry.
Amod had asked me to come really because when he was thinking of coming himself, I had said to him, well, it's interesting because I had no interest in participating in blogs. I could say I'm somewhere between a curmudgeon and a Luddite when it comes to this stuff. And I tend to see blogs, and you can laugh at me. I don't think about like this anymore. But as a graduate student, at least, I thought blogs were for people who, for whatever reason, maybe they needed, like if they had more people around to talk to, they would talk to them, but now they're going to talk to the universe instead. And so I tended, like the word blog, I'm not sympathetic to, at least I wasn't. Anyway, I could go on and make jokes about Facebook and Twitter, but you get where I'm coming from. So, but what I found, what I said to Amod when we were talking about it was that I got involved in this simply because I knew Amod a little bit. We had run into each other during a semester when I was at Texas, and he was there visiting, working with the man who would be my dissertation advisor. I knew Elisa because she contributed a chapter to a volume that I put out, just came out this year. And so I trusted them, and I knew they were serious, and I didn't really know what to expect. But what I found that I think is kind of remarkable is that in retrospect, and this is what I was sharing with Amod, is that it seemed to me that most of the things I feel like I get out of conference participation, I've gotten through the blog. And so I sat down and I thought, well, what is it? So what do we get out of attending conferences? And it seemed to me there's 4 things, and you tell me if I'm missing anything, okay? So, so first one is, of course, and perhaps the primary reason, is that a conference provides a space where people can share and discuss work that is coherent but not necessarily complete, right? A typical conference paper is one step beyond publication and enshrinement and being entombed even in a journal where it can no longer be modified. It can be criticized, and later papers can be written, but it's prima facie and discussion-oriented kind of stuff. So that sharing coherent but somewhat provisional work. Another is a space where you can critically reflect on the discipline, right? You come together in philosophy, of course, things about, there's all sorts of disciplinary discussions. What's the future of philosophy in relation to the humanities in America and higher education? And also bigger picture sort of things. What's the self-conceit of philosophy, and how do we now think about it in relation to science and things like that? Philosophers talk about minds, but do we do cognitive science? Well, whatever. So that's a second thing, reflecting on the discipline. A third thing is socialization, frankly, right? I mean, conferences, you hang out, you get to know people, right? You make friends, you solidify relationships. And fourth, you start, this is particularly, it seems to me, for early career scholars, the kind of people that Amod is saying may be concerned with promotion and tenure, you start to make a footprint in the discipline in a way that right, as a graduate student, I'll chair that panel, it's on the CV, right? Now, it doesn't always have to be so mercenary, of course, but the idea is you do start to make a footprint in a way that your career can become solidified, and it can help you in your academic standing, and indeed that you're standing with your home institution. So
as well as the line on the CV, there's also the point that people know who you are.
Absolutely, yeah. So footprint, broadly speaking, social footprint as well. So I was thinking, so does a blog do this? So certainly, I think, as Amod has already shown you, the first, which was to provide a space where you can share work that's coherent but perhaps provisional, that's clearly taken care of. And if there was a ton of time, I would show you particular posts, how they satisfy this. But of course, you've already seen at least hints on the blog, things like Andrew Ollett, one of our contributors from Columbia University, who's a Sanskritist, will put forward reflections on Sanskrit philosophical vocabulary and the kind of thing that you can indeed share at a conference. Of course, a blog post may be shorter, but similar sort of things. Reflecting on the discipline, well, that's in the wheelhouse of a disciplinary blog. And as we've said, we don't want it to become cancerous or morbid, as it can sometimes be, but it's an interesting thing about working on non-Western philosophy. In a way, we feel like we're part of a kind of movement to not only understand these great classical thinkers, but in a way translate them to the broader philosophical community and say, oh, there's something relevant here. I'm a fan of the Perseus Project. I thought I was going to do ancient Greek philosophy when I started my graduate program in Texas. I thought Indian philosophy would be a kind of dalliance that I loved, but getting there, I realized that Indian philosophy is my true love, and Greek philosophy is my dalliance now. And so, but there's ways where when you do Indian philosophy, people can be annoying like this, but there's a way where you want to bang the table and say, every time someone says, oh, such and such discovered X, Y, and Z, you want to say, but You know what I mean? It's like saying your mom is the only one who loves you or something, or you like, my mom's the best mom because she's the one I know. There's a way in which there's a lot of interesting things going on in the non-Western world. Why am I bringing this stuff up? Because in terms of reflection on the discipline, this has been a big feature of our blog. People saying, how do we help people understand Indian philosophy is simply philosophy, right? We're not, and so there's a lot of ways that we discuss appropriate translation, appropriate conversational issues that we can reflect on. What can we do differently? And also, what can we identify as problems institutionally that we can say, hey, you know, I don't know. I'm so not a complainer like this, and I get annoyed by people, but I always think it's funny to say ancient philosophy is a discipline, right? Imagine I say I do ancient philosophy, but I only do Persia. You'd say call it ancient Persian philosophy. So anyway, we have discussions like this. Now, socialization's been one that I thought was interesting. I have all these sidebar. You go to a conference, you hear a paper, then you talk in the hallway. Oh, I like that. I didn't like that. Oh, you know her work? Sure, I do. That's happened in the blog. People writing, discuss papers on the blog forms the basis of friendships. It's a very interesting and totally unexpected thing. So even the social component of blogs, of course, we're not drinking together, which may be for the best, but that feature's there. Now, what about the fourth thing that Amod had mentioned? What about your scholarly footprint, so to speak? Certainly, I'm having with some of my heroes in the academy that as a graduate student, I learned from them. I saw them, you know, they were on the Mount Rushmore of scholars of Indian thought whom I turned to with awe. And I know these people now, largely, at least in no small measure, because of the blog and because of their interest in it. But there's also a way in which, even in terms, here's the interesting thing about a blog. You're right, Amod, that a blog post does not count as a peer-reviewed paper. And even though a conference presentation is not peer-reviewed, it's not really the same place. What I have found, though, is that because of the interest in the digital humanities, participating in the blog in a significant way is something that I think would be framed as service to the profession in ways that's actually considered cutting edge in some circles. And so there are ways now where blog participation can be seen and is indeed framed as service to the profession.
Have you found that's been your
absolutely
case for you?
Absolutely, absolutely.
But committee looks at your tenure committee looks and says, oh, wow,
yeah,
you're doing some digital humanities.
Sure, they think it's, yeah, and particularly like we have a dean who really wants to push the digital humanities, and so there's ways where I think this naturally speaks to her. And so, so in any case, I don't want to go on past the time, but the point of going to a most. That's true. We kind of. That's true. That's true. That's true.
Because I have to teach, but you also think.
Well, we're going to wrap it up.
But I have one question, which is,
by all means,
how did you manage to? You've talked about how you screen contributors and stuff like that. Did you have any problem sort of getting traction? How did you get people involved?
That's a good point.
How did the word spread around? Did you have to make any effort to create the community that you had, obviously?
It's a good point. So I think, maybe I'll start a road and you can add to that. What I think we found is, and this is something Amod and Elisa have helped me with, if you keep putting out quality content, you can trust that people are going to find it. And so there's a way in which we've tried.
You haven't made any effort beyond trying to do the best.
Well, we've noticed, but we've spoken to some of the big disciplinary blogs and said, could you please give us a mention, right? And so this lighter blog, which, you know, it's a long discussion about that blog, but the day he mentioned us, we had roughly 2,000 original viewers, right? And so that's a good way to get things going. In a way, our biggest problem has been there are people that we think are possibly really strong contributors, but our whole focus has been we'd rather, at least right now, we'd rather lose out on possible contributions than have to run the risk of someone we don't know creating disruptions. Like it's actually remarkable the way in which the blog has been so positive in terms of the attitude. So yeah, that's a few things. Hey, thanks, Lenny.
Can be very disruptive.
It's true. It's true. It's true. Well, thanks, Lenny. In any case, yeah.
But you should.
We will.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
And when you're done, if you can just put them back in the cooler or in the bag, I'll pick this stuff up later. Okay.
Can we just leave them in the room and make sure the door is locked, or?
I think the person who let me in is responsible for that. So I would just, It's okay if you leave it here. I can get the key
Okay,
after
all
my
right.
class.
It's a pleasure,
I
Lenny.
have to be back up here. Sorry to run.
No, by all means. So we're wrapping up now. The short story is simply this. It seems like there's a very, very natural and unforced analog with conference participation with something like a blog. I think the worst thing about a blog is the word blog. Like we were talking about being from the 80s, right? So I was not part of the punk or hardcore scene, although many of my friends were. And it reminds me of fanzines. Remember fanzines? You make a photocopy, right? Back when Xerox technology was cutting edge, right? And you put okay, whoever's coming to town, I don't know, Black Flag's coming to town or something. And so weblogs seem to be like Wild West-ish and kind of like whatever goes. Amode made a great point though in conversation that with the rise of social media, a lot of the kind of oversharing uninteresting content of blogs has been pushed to social media, where the notion of blogs is a place for professional interaction and sharing and professional conversation. It's much more natural than it was even 5 years ago. So I thought that was an interesting point. But in any case, sorry, you were.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, like in the mid O's, you would expect that like on a blog people would write, their daily blog post, like here's what I had for lunch today, kind of like live journal kind of thing. But now people do that on Twitter and Facebook. So that a blog post, nobody writes a 140 character blog post. When you do that, you could just tweet it and be done with it. You write on a blog because you have something longer to say. Not as long as a scholarly article.
Right.
But
there's a number of places, Tumblr or whatever else, other sites where kind of quick sharing can be taken care of. It's great, right? As someone who can't stand Twitter, right? Sorry. I like to concentrate. I hope my kids can concentrate. It has at least allowed this, right? It's like it siphoned off some of that stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, and one of the more helpful things on Twitter is when people basically use it as kind of an aggregator for
true.
blogs.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like it's just a link to a
exactly
blog
right. Yeah. I'm being a bit of a curmudgeon about it.
No, but that's that. I mean, I think it's important to have the curmudgeon's voice.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think when people think of blogs today, increasingly they would think of something like Andrew Sullivan's blog or something like that, where it's reasonably thoughtful commentary.
And essays.
Right.
Right. Well, thanks everybody. It was a pleasure. And thanks for having us.
Yeah. Do you guys have any other questions?
I think not at the moment, other than do you do any tracking of citations to things published on your blog? I'm curious, have you done any network or analysis to see what your most popular post is, or if other people are mentioning things you've written?
There's some things under the hood at WordPress where you can see what gets a lot of hits.
I was wondering if you've done any more.
Well, Amode maybe. I certainly have.
Yeah, we have not gone beyond the basics for WordPress tools. There's been one of my one of those sort of like goals to think about has been get more into Google Analytics and try and see if I can figure out some more stuff related to that.
But it's an odd thing where people that I don't know will say, "Oh, I've been reading your stuff on the blog." Like it's a weird experience, right? So there's ways where sometimes too the reach of these things is not always easy to capture. Thanks again.
All right.
I would just be curious, how much international participation do you have?
Yeah.
Quite well. I mean,
I don't know. So by the way, this is what Amode said earlier about India, right?
Yeah.
So many about Indian philosophy. There's there's a lot of really good work being done in Japan, a lot of good work in Europe, a lot of good work in India, and a lot of good work in America. So there's ways where we've tried to make a point to invite scholars outside of America to be part of it. It's an ongoing initiative we have. Sorry, did you want to add?
Well, I think something that actually helped with that in particular is the fact that Elisa is Italian, and that I think that made most of the scholars that I recommended were American or Canadian, and most of the ones that she recommended were in continental Europe.
And she also works in Japan quite a bit as well, so she does have contacts.
Right. So we have quite a large number of Europeans writing on the blog, and I think that's a nice sort of cross-fertilization that goes outside of the traditional disciplinary networks that you get through an American conference. We have sort of felt that the fact that we don't have people writing on the blog from India is something of a gap that we would like to fill. But it's a tricky one because just in terms of kind of finding out where the good scholarship is done in India. Because this comparison with China is interesting. That on Warp Left and Way there are a lot of scholars from China, and I think people recognize that places, especially Hong Kong, is one of the sort of big centers globally for the study of Chinese philosophy. And I wouldn't really say that the same is true for India.
Well, sometimes though, some really good people in India, they go to finish their graduate education in England or whatnot.
Well, exactly. That's what I mean. Yeah, there are plenty of there. We have Indians on the blog,
But people living in India,
but not so many people living in
That's
India.
not important.
Yeah, and that's the reasons for that are probably a longer discussion. But yeah, so it's certainly international in the sense that we've got Canadians, we've got Europeans, which I suppose is more than many blogs can say.
Well, thanks again. Do we have to hit anything to stop this?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
stop
that stop broadcast button that I
Well,
shouldn't have hit the
now
first
understood
time.
what it
Yes.
is.
Well, I got it.
Okay, bye, everybody.
DCNE.